By the time we got to sort of early 2024, I was in this position where I had gone through building my first business, started off extremely idealistic, trying to build something that in my mind would maximize social impact, found out that the business model didn't work.
Welcome back to 40-Minute Mentor, the podcast on a mission to raise aspirations and inspire the next generation of category-defining founders, all in just 40 minutes. In today's Where Are They Now feature episode, we're joined by a great friend of JBM's, James Lowe, co-founder and CEO of Ethos, who are building the fastest way to search for people, companies, and products with AI. Currently still in stealth, the business has already raised their seed round led by General Catalyst, with participation from leading AI investors like Joe Lonsdale, 8VC, and Sarah Guar's Conviction, European champions like Sarah Drinkwater and Christian Rieber, as well as world-leading AI researchers like Oriol Vinyals, co-head of Google Gemini. What a lineup. The last time we had James on the podcast was back in Series 8, where we explored everything from his upbringing, dealing with rejections, his time at SoftBank Vision Fund, and building Mana. For very good reasons, James's previous episode has been one of our most popular episodes to date, so I am beyond excited to have him back on the pod to share all that he's been up to since. So, James, we always have a wonderful time with together. It's a real pleasure to get you back on the podcast. How are you doing?
Yeah, thank you, James. It's always great to be here. It's awesome. Doing great.
Amazing. Well, it's been a little while since you last were on the podcast when you were building Mana at the time. So I know you've been on a bit of a roller coaster since then. So do you mind updating our audience on what's happened since you last came on the podcast in 2022 and the journey of kind of sort of scaling Mana and ultimately exiting it? How did that come about?
Yeah, for sure. It's been a real roller coaster. So, last time I was still building another business called Mana. It was an education platform when it first started. And in around 2 years, we realized that we had a fundamental problem, which is that the students loved the platform, but the parents hated it. And so this fundamental issue where it's extremely difficult to get the real payers to commit to the platform. And so we pivoted many times as a business. At one point, we became a lifetime learning platform. And then, by 2022, we almost ran out of money and we ended up pivoting into a sales automation company. And so we went so close to running out that we were around 2 weeks away from running out of money. We got saved by one amazing investor who came in at the last minute to sort of plug in to save us. And we managed to sort of turn the business around and turn it into an AI sales automation tool. We got extremely lucky because we launched around 2 months before ChatGPT came out. And so it sort of came out and we just hit the right wave and sales automation just took off. And so we got into a sort of really good level of revenue. We were cash flow positive at various points. But then, in mid-2023, my dad ended, he went to sort of really deep financial difficulty. And so I went from sort of a fairly heavenly experience of going, oh, wow, we finally cracked some way to get this company to work, to almost instantaneously, this is going to be somewhat of a disaster. And the only way I could sort of get out of this situation was really to leave Mana and basically get as much capital as I could. And so I ended up working multiple jobs at once. Some of those jobs were really strange, right? So I was working for a banker who was setting up his family office. I was working with a Hong Kong billionaire who was setting up a sort of charter city based in the UK. And I was working with a prominent venture capital firm to help them build out their deep tech strategy. And so I was working this variety of jobs. By the time we got to sort of early 2024, I was in this position where I had gone through building my first business, started off extremely idealistic, trying to build something that in my mind would maximize social impact, found out that the business model didn't work, pivoted the company to something that in some ways is a very cynical business, right? It's sort of like a spamming business at scale, but which made a ton of money very quickly. Realized that at the peak of it, I sort of, for personal reasons, had a complete sort of 360 turnaround from there. And then, gone through this period to help my family, and really felt like my career was in this strange place, right? So all the trade-offs hadn't really sort of panned out. So I had basically left, a very comfortable career in McKinsey and SoftBank, and essentially left before the rewards were reaped, right? I didn't become a partner or anything like that. And so gave up God knows how much earnings in those periods of time, built a business, but then never got it to sort of true success in the way that I imagined. and was now sort of saddled with this like personal responsibility without really knowing where we're going to go from there. So I was extremely fortunate that from that moment in sort of early 2024 going, I have no idea where my life is actually going at that point, to now we're at the end of 2024 and a new business has been started, backed by General Catalyst, backed by some amazing investors on an extrememely good trajectory. Just got engaged like 3 days ago. and,
Congrats.
like, thank you so much. So that's the roller coaster that's happened.
What a turnaround. What a turnaround. You told me this story about everything that your family's been through and how you basically quit to help those dads and ended up working multiple jobs at the same time. I mean, it is a story that could be a Netflix show. It's absolutely remarkable, but it also says what an amazing person you are and an amazing son, and also your talents to be able to hold down multiple jobs in very different roles and have an impact. And I know you've gone a long way to sort of helping your dad out. So firstly, I just have such admiration and respect for you. These are some pretty stressful, challenging times you've had to deal with. And we're going to come on to how you turned that right around and you're in an incredible place right now. But where does that resilience come from? And what helped you get through the other side of that? Because you must have been devastated to basically walk away from a business that's flying and then probably stretch beyond belief with huge pressure on your back. Like, how did you handle that? And where does that resilience come from?
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, I don't think I was that resilient in that period. So I think I was extremely weak for many periods in this process. So if we were speaking in sort of mid 2023, you would have found a very different version of me where I was completely unsure about where we're going to go next. I had no idea what the solutions were to my parents' situation. I was very much in a mindset where I just had to get through it. Basically, just figure out something that's going to work. And I don't think at any point of this I was going, I'm mentally stable and strong, and I'm just going to figure this thing out. I think at each stage of this, I was having, panic attacks every 3 days and sort of jumping between deep depression, euphoria, but a sort of, the sort of depression-induced euphoria where any small bit of good news makes you go a bit crazy. And so I think I was very much in that type of fragile mental state. And I think two things ultimately brought me out of that sort of valley of death type situation. I think one was that, and I think I completely underestimated this, but a very small number of mentors who in that particular moment were just like, we don't care what you're going to do next. We're just going to back you to figure it out. And this included, a few of them were my old bosses at SoftBank. So they were partners and managing partners at SoftBank. And they backed me financially, effectively invested early in my current business, but without any idea what it was going to be. So it was literally like, they basically gave me money to figure my life out, which was amazing, but also backed me with opportunity, right? So some of these people were from SoftBank, but also, a few of these folks were from completely different areas of life, right? So one of them literally is my neighbor, right? But she happens to be from a big hedge fund and stuff like this, but, she literally was a neighbor. And I didn't even know about her career until much, much later. But there were a few people who had just been serving me for a long time. And they backed me financially, but backed me opportunity in the sense that they were actively vouching for me. And so literally they would go to partners at big private equity funds and go, this is a generational opportunity. Don't give this guy a full-time job because he's never going to work for you, but like give him some gig where his skills are actually helpful for you. And in that particular moment, I was thinking, I don't really have any real skills. I was like, hey, I've been a consultant, which means I'm really good at BSing people. And I've been like a semi-investor, but I haven't been an investor for that long either. And like I have built a business, but not very successfully. So I have all these unculminated capabilities. And so in many ways, it was very limiting. But they just vouched for me everywhere. And it landed me with these opportunities that gave me a shot at sort of solving my parents' problems, but also building a foundation for what's going to come next. So that, I think, fundamentally was the reason why I was able to get out of it.
Yeah. And the mentors, can have such an incredible impact on your life and career. And that's a great example of that. And huge congratulations on the engagement. I want to really say that again. That is a spoiler alert and a half, and a wonderful piece of news to hear on a Friday. So congrats from all of the 40-Minute Mentor and JVM crew. You're now building Ethos, which has had incredible traction. You raised fantastic seed round from General Catalyst, one of the top funds in the world. You've landed top tier consultancies and VC firms as early clients, and you're still operating in stealth. So tell us a bit more about the origin idea, and can you give our listeners the elevator pitch for what Ethos is all about?
Yeah, absolutely. So in essence, we're building a search engine for business. So you should be able to search for people, companies, and products in a business context super easily, right? Just describe what you want and get them. The founding hypothesis is basically that consumer search is almost a solved problem, right? So obviously, like Google made it super easy to find almost anything, right? Websites, images, products, so on and so forth. And similarly, with Perplexity, with this sort of latest age of AI search products, we've gone even better at doing all those things. But business search, strangely, is still extremely difficult. And when you look at the sort of generation of AI products out there today, most of them are focusing on business search internally, right? So you have great businesses like Lean, for example, or Heavia, and they're basically going, let me look through all your private internal company data and do a really good job of retrieving all that data to you. And that's interesting, but we actually think the most interesting opportunity in business search is the external search. So how do you find the right people in a sales and a hiring and an investing context? How do you find the right businesses that have the products that you want, right, in a sort of B2B sales and B2B buying type context? How do you find like the right people in a full-on sort of hiring platform type context and so on, right? So you have all these fundamental transactions in the economy that today we call sales, hiring, investing, but actually they're just matching problems between people, companies, and products. And if you build the best business search engine externally, you'll be able to serve these transactions extremely well. And so we set about building that. And the observation we make with the whole market is basically we have a huge amount of unstructured data that's already existing on the public web that for the first time, because of the advancements in LLMs, we're able to extract from. And so you look at all the sort of data on your company websites, you look at all the little personal bio websites people have, look at every podcast that's ever been published, every workshop and conference, every sort of blog post, and so on and so forth. And what you can do now with LLMs is not just read them and sort of dump them all in VectorDB and like run RAG on it, which is like the sort of classic approach. But actually what you can do is like post-process every piece of these pieces of data and basically take out the relationships and match it to the knowledge graph. And so if you think about the economy as a whole as this like giant knowledge graph where you have like people, companies, and products as nodes, they have these relationships between them. Then suddenly, if someone on a podcast says, hey, my company bought from this other company, or hey, when as an investor, I was comparing these three companies, this company was the best one. You suddenly have all this rich data comparing the value of each of these nodes and the relationships between those nodes. And if you post-process them in the right way, you actually build up this knowledge graph in a really rich and interesting way and in a live way as it develops. And so that's essentially what we're doing.
I love it. I love it. And you can really see this can be transformative for companies, particularly ones like ours, search brands, doing research. I can see the opportunity. You've hit some really remarkable milestones in a very short amount of time. So do you mind sharing with our listeners, what are you most proud of so far and why?
So first, I think we approach this problem with, I think, two different things that are quite interesting. So the first is we really focused a lot on how can we use what's already public, but in a really sort of innovative and interesting way. And so the easy answer to building this company would have been, let's just do exactly what everyone else is doing, which is like, let's take all the data, dump it into a VectorDB, run embeddings on it, and basically like run RAG, right? And that would have been like an easy solution. But we spent a huge amount of time digging into every type of use case where people search for people, companies, and products. And we realized that actually there are lots of sort of interesting heuristics in this process, right? So how do you figure out someone's a talented person? Well, you might look at their job titles, sure, but you also look at the pace of their promotion, right? How quickly do they go through those steps? You might look at, all kinds of signals of their talent, of like companies they work for, or maybe if they're working for a startup, like who are the investors in that startup, and so on and so forth. And what's interesting is that almost all of these data points are already public, but if you combine them in an interesting way, you start building a really rich, like sort of set of information about that. And then now when you cross between different nodes, so we look at like companies and people, for example, you start seeing, oh, wow, if I'm looking for someone who's really a core contributor to the success of this startup, that I want to know, first of all, what are the major milestones the startup has gone through? So maybe they raised a big round or maybe released a big product and so on. And I want to find the people who were there when they built that product and released that product, right? And so matching the company milestones with the people give you an even deeper and richer understanding of the people. And so I think the first thing I'm really proud of is the fact that we didn't just go at this and say, hey, LLMs are the big thing. And so let's just build this business search engine with the latest LLMs with all the techniques everyone else is using. But we basically went from first principles and went, what's the most effective way we could actually build this type of search? And I think we got to a very interesting answer. And then the second big piece here is that we were extremely focused from day one on a very niche use case. And I don't think we've really veered away from it. And so the sort of challenge with this type of like business search engine thing is that you could end up building the broadest product ever, right? So you could build a sales tool, you could build a hiring tool, that you could build like an investing tool, you could build like a zillion things on it. And so we chose from day one to be like, we're going to focus on one niche, which is the expert networks. We want to eat the lunch of like GLG, Alpha Sites, Tegas, like all these sort of expert networks that investment firms today buy from. And we know that this is an interesting market because all these investors are calling experts for $1,000, $2,000 per hour. And it's a 75% gross margin business, right? Incredibly profitable per transaction, and where the incumbents are incredibly bad, right? So like they take 2 to 5 days to find the right person. They literally have 1,000 full-time employees manually searching for them and so on and so forth. And that just by building this search engine, we've effectively solved this entire problem with AI. You could search for people in natural language. You could reach out to them with automated outreach. You could get them on the call. You could extract the transcripts and get the information from the transcripts into insights. Do all that with AI without 1,000 full-time employees. And so suddenly we have an incredibly profitable per transaction business model applied to a problem that actually gives us latitude to become a much bigger company over time. Those are the two things that I think I'm most proud of as a company that maybe is actually quite different from how we were building Mana before. And we're sort of both focused and unique and differentiated. So yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely brilliant. And I know already you're taking a lot of the lunch. So that is only going to continue as you evolve the business. And you're doing this in a very lean way, right? How many people are in the business at the moment?
Yeah, so at the moment it's two of us. So essentially my co-founder and I. And by
Incredible.
the way, credit like 80-90% of the fact that we're able to raise this round so quickly is really that my co-founder is absolutely amazing human being. And so, he was a staff scientist at DeepMind, but also just an incredible person.
As are you, James. It's a real dream team, that, and you can see why you're having the traction you are. You alluded to this being different to how you're building Mana. And what are the lessons you've taken from that first founding experience that you are kind of taken into this build? This is a different proposition, and I'm sure you are going to be that much better for the previous experience. So what are the lessons you can take away? And what are the lessons you would like to pass on to any other founders listening to this that might be in the earlier parts of their journey?
Yeah, I think there are fundamentally probably around 3 massive lessons from Mana. The first is to focus on problems that you've experienced before. And I think I made a massive mistake with Mana that when I was thinking about the problem, I was thinking about it top down. I was going, what does society need most? And in my mind at the time was like education at scale and democratizing access to opportunity and so on and so forth. So there's a top-down motivation. But it wasn't a problem that I had personally experienced for at least 10 years, right? So like I've been out of education for a long time. And so I didn't really have a deep understanding of what the actual user was experiencing day to day and what the alternatives were and how they thought about the problem. And so when we got to this company, with Ethos, we are completely focused on a problem that I experienced literally every single day when I was at McKinsey, when I was at SoftBank. And every time I talk to an investor, all the investors are experiencing this problem day to day. And so there's a deep understanding of every part of the user flow, and it fundamentally changes how we build a product. So I think that's number one. Number two is to be extremely selective about who are your first backers and to almost entirely focus it on personality over reputation. And there's something really interesting about how, when I look at the current cap table that we're built out, really, it doesn't actually really matter which firms these partners are at. These set of partners were at a completely different firm who have taken money from them anyway. And the reason is that these people are just absolutely incredible, right? Like they have this mixture of capability all the way from someone's like ultra connected in private equity and in European families and institutions and so on, who could build the relationships on the business side, to having deep product empathy, having been like fantastic sort of exited entrepreneurs, exit to Microsoft, exit for 100 millions or more, that type of thing, to like deep design sense of like UX every single day, to like deep in AI, right? So you have like so many of these different types of capabilities, and it just all combines in a way that really helps us build the business effectively. And so that's number two, of like being very, very selective and sort of going, hey, you're actually choosing the partner, you're choosing the person, and you're not just choosing the firm, which often is the way that these things are pitched. The final piece is we don't really need to hire. And this sounds quite crazy, but when we look at it, with Mana, I think I made the classic entrepreneur's mistake. We raised the money and we start hiring immediately. And we grew from around 3 people to 15 in the space around 3 months after we raised the round, and we kept at 15 for a very long time. And really, the moment you shift from a single atomic unit, where I think anywhere between 0 to 5 people, you have sort of one atomic unit where everyone's sort of communicating with each other in one go, to anything that goes to multiple atomic units, you suddenly have to introduce management. And the moment you introduce management, it becomes very difficult to pivot, becomes very difficult to communicate, and becomes very, very difficult to sort of ensure that you don't start hiring management types as well, where you have people who are no longer individual contributors, but have a habit of sort of bossing other people around to do other things. So that the habit of saying we should do something, but without doing it themselves, but sort of going like, hey, I'm going to find someone else to do it. And so this time around, staying 2 people all the way, building the entire first product, just the 2 of us, being extremely sort of mindful of when we actually want to hire versus just using contractor resources. Or, we're very lucky to be part of AWS's accelerator, and AWS actually funded like a DevOps team for us. So, all kinds of stuff like this where you could get sort of part-time resources where you need it, but fundamentally keeping the atomic units small until the number of people genuinely drives the success of your company. That has made us move faster, better, and more consistently than ever before. So those 3 things I think are fundamental to what I've learned from Mana and bringing it today.
Yeah, such great lessons. Thank you for sharing them. You received a lot of attention from VCs when you were raising your seed round, and you ultimately decided to go with GC. Do you mind sharing a bit about that whole process? Because you mentioned the importance of connecting on a personal level with the people that are backing you. So what were the things that they did that made them stand out from the crowd?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I think I benefited from the fact that having raised money before with Mana, already had like a base of connections, especially in the European VCs, but also some of the US VCs. And so it was less difficult to get some kind of meeting in general. But we purposely kept the fundraise extremely focused. And so we said, hey, we actually know that this first set of backers is super important. And it's unlikely that we'll build a deep enough relationship, a 1 month, 2 month raise, to really trust that they're the right partners. And so given that there are sort of 2 or 3 funds that we know extremely well and that we've known for multiple years, we should focus on those relationships. And we should basically lock them as our lead investors. And then everyone else, maybe we could build like a quick relationship and sort of as a participator in the round. But fundamentally, the lead investors have to be people that we've known for a while and we really trust. And then so we did that in that way. And with GC in particular, there were 2 things that were just amazing about them. One is that both Jeanette and Juliet, who are the sort of 2 partners who led around, they are amazingly authentic people who care about the founders and also have a sense of broader social mission. And that was something that we just really, really cared about. Right. So when we were raising this round, like Juliet, on behalf of the GC team, actually wrote an email to us that was like, I think it was like 10 bullets long or something like this. It was like this extremely long email. And it was actually just explaining why they have so much conviction in us and why we are sort of mission aligned. And Jeanette, who happened to have a sort of painter grandfather, similar to my dad's also an oil painter, sent an oil painting set to my home. And realizing that I was really into philosophy, sent me a Nietzsche book called Human to Human, which I really enjoyed as well. And so they really understand the founder, and it sort of got that really right. And so when we took their money, we actually sent an email back to all the GC partners. And we explained why we had so much conviction in GC as our main investing partner and why we have so much mission alignment. So I think that's just like really fundamental. And then the second big piece tied to this is that when you look at Hemant and what he's doing with GC, and this is controversial in the VC world, where I think most VCs are kind of going, They're raising funds that are really big. They're doing things that VCs don't normally do, like they're owning, like they're literally buying hospitals and owning them as a testing ground for their portfolio companies. I think when you look at what Haman's doing, he is literally trying to use capital as a weapon to reform society. And he is focusing on the fact that VC, despite its sort of financial success in the last 25 years, which is in itself kind of dubious as an asset class, like despite that, it hasn't really affected how humans live their lives across broad swathes of society, right? Our education, our healthcare, our living standards haven't risen because of this generation of internet businesses. And so he's going, how can we use capital as a resource, as a weapon in many different forms to trigger social change? And that to us is like a massive sense of alignment. Like we totally agree with that. And yes, it's controversial in VC and whether that's the right thing to do as a fund. But for us, it's like we want our backers to be exactly that. So we're super excited about that as well.
I absolutely love that. I love the thoughtfulness of their approach, and it makes a difference, right? It's they're taking that extra effort to really, from both sides. It shows what a great partnership you have already as well, which is awesome to see. I guess it's not been the easiest environment for founders, many of whom I'm sure will be listening to this when it comes to fundraising. So, as somebody that's done it very successfully before, what tips or tricks or suggestions do you have for founders that might be struggling with that process at the moment? Is there anything that you think they should be considering and thinking about to give themselves a better chance of landing that sort of investment that can help scale their businesses?
I think there are three fundamental things about fundraising that I think I've learned very painfully from Mana and learned again this time. I think number one is think very seriously about whether you actually want to raise VC money. And I think even with this business, I thought for a very long time whether it's actually better to be some kind of bootstrap business or some kind of angel funded business that gets to a cash flow positive outcome. And I think my conclusion right now is that as the sort of bull market has disappeared and you go back to sort of a lower end of the cycle, and really constantly technology investing will be a boom and bust like cyclical business, it becomes clearer that venture is a very specific type of financial instrument suitable for a very specific type of business. And really, the chances of a business becoming $1 billion, $10 billion, even $100 billion business is extremely minute. And as a founder, the question has to be, are you trying to build $1 billion business, which has its own trade-offs? Or are you trying to build a cash flow positive business that will, be enjoyable to build for you and will be something that, makes a financial return in some other way? So that's number one. And then number two, I would say the fundraising process fundamentally is a matchmaking process more than a persuading process, in the sense that right now, because of the power dynamic between a VC and a founder, often founders feel like I have to contort myself to pitch this VC whatever they want to hear to get the money. And the reality is that if the VC doesn't already have a thesis that very much aligns with the direction of your business, if they don't have conviction in the market that you're building in, if they don't have some kind of signaling in their heads of what good talent looks like that matches with your background, they're not going to be convinced. And they meet way too many founders to ever be convinced. And so the fundamental thing in VC is not to optimize for the least number of rejections, but rather to do as many meetings quickly as you can and get to as many quick no's as you can so that you can get the perfect match for your business, regardless of the reputation of the fund, because ultimately it's actually finding the right people that you want to work with over a long period of time. And the final piece is basically pitches can be incredibly simple. And simplicity is actually the hardest part. When we first built Mana, I think our pitch decks were like 30 pages long or something like this. It was like really long. We had all these other things. It was very sort of difficult to figure out exactly what we wanted to say. With this business, in our latest sort of demo day when we were with Sarah and SF, the thing was 5 pages long and it had massive impact, right? It was like immediately people got the idea. What I figured out is that trying to distill exactly what you're building, exactly who you're building for, and what exactly the problem you're solving is basically all of the business. And if you find yourself writing pitch decks that are 30 pages long or memos that are like 6 pages long, whatever, it's actually not a sign that you're struggling with the pitching. It's a sign that you're struggling with building the business with clarity. And so I would spend a huge amount of time just trying to go, how to describe this thing in one line, how to describe this thing in one paragraph, how to describe this thing in 5 pages and get everything out of the way. And how do I make sure that within 30 seconds, someone very clearly understands exactly what you're trying to do and why you're valuable? Because if you figure out those questions, the pitch will work itself out because you will actually build a much better business in the process. So yeah, those are the 3 things I think would be helpful.
Brilliant advice. Thank you, James. I'm sure our listeners will be scribbling away in their notepads and taking those learnings into the next pitches they take. Awesome. Thank you so much. We're sadly at an end, but before we go, we've got to ask you, what are your big plans for Ethos in the coming years? And what are you excited? What are you looking forward to, I guess, in 2025, both from a work and personal perspective?
Yeah. So, first of all, we're still so early in our journey. The company was incorporated in June 2024. And so we're barely, 5 months into this business effectively. And so we're so early. And so the way we think about it is over the sort of 10-year, 20-year, 30-year horizon, however long this business is going to sort of continue to thrive, we're trying to build the opportunity engine for humanity. So what we mean by that is that we want to be able to match any talented person to the right opportunity at every stage of your life. And so today we start with matching you to expert calls, which is like the nichest and most simple, basic version of this. But over time, we want to match you to every other type of opportunity. You can imagine to calls, to surveys, to even expert data annotation for AI training, to speaking opportunities, advisory opportunities, fractional hiring, part-time, full-time. And we want to be able to get a really deep understanding of who you are. That's why we call it ethos, because it's the ethos of your person, and be able to match make the opportunity in every sense of the word. And so that's what we're trying to do. And so therefore, almost all of our work is going to be step by step in this way. So right now we do expert networks, and it gives us really rich data on the experts we're getting, on what they really know. It gives us really rich data on what the investors and consultancies are looking at and what the industries as a whole are focusing on. And then over time, we basically start expanding the sort of types of search you could do and the types of opportunities that are available. And so we want to sort of gradually grow in that direction. We'll see whether we manage to do that. But for now, day one, it's all about the expert calls. We're going to do as many of those as we can.
What an exciting future you have, James. I couldn't be happier for you from a personal perspective, but also from a professional perspective, especially all that you've come through. I think you're a real shining light for anyone listening to this that might be going through some harder times right now about what you can come through and go on to achieve. And I know you've only just got started. So I'm super excited to see what 2025 brings for you and Ethos. And can't wait to catch up again soon to hear all the progress you're making. Thanks for coming back on the podcast.
Thank you so much, James.
Cheers. Thanks a lot. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. I really hope that you found it useful and inspiring. If we have left any questions unanswered, or if you have any feedback or guest recommendations for future series, then please make sure you get in touch on info@jbmc.co.uk. I often get asked by listeners how you can help us spread the word about 40-Minute Mentor. There are 2 simple ways you can help. Firstly, share this episode on your preferred social media platform, and LinkedIn is probably where I'm most likely to see it. And you can also leave us a review on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Every share on social media and review left on the podcast platforms really helps us to get 40-Minute Mentor in front of new audiences and share the power of mentorship even further. Thank you so much for your ongoing support, and I look forward to seeing you again next Wednesday for even more pocket-sized mentorship.